Once Irish immigrants were in America, there was a certain amount of mobility and assimilation that they had to do. Now, assimilation means a social process whereby a minority group gradually adopts the customs and attitudes of the prevailing culture. So, at this time in America, the prevailing culture was primarily Anglo-Saxon English culture, white and English speaking. And so, despite stereotypes that we just looked at, in the previous video, Irish were easier and faster to assimilate than most other immigrant groups that would come, in some cases before, but mostly after them, because of their white skin, their English language, which really they only needed to drop their Irish accents to sort of blend in with others, and a very similar culture, perhaps slightly name change, like from Mick Dufferin to simply Dufferin, or something very similar to that. Irish laborers in America really were seen as disposable workers. They were primarily allowed to take on jobs that were very heavy in labor, very intensive kinds of jobs. They were granted the most dangerous jobs at quite low pay. This included construction jobs, like you can see here in New York City, a man working on a skyscraper, sitting on the very edge with no harness and no restraints, which of course would never happen today. They also worked on the railroads. I mentioned earlier that the Transcontinental Railroad was built in large part from the east toward the west by Irish immigrants and also Native or African Americans. Roads, canals like the Erie Canal in New York and others, as well as coal mining industries, were primarily occupied by Irish laborers, at least for the men. Women, we'll see, will have held different jobs, but there was very high accident and death rates in these types of jobs. Irish working women, on the other hand, primarily came over to America as single people. Now, Irish women did not typically move over in family groupings necessarily. They tended to come on their own, and they were able actually to take on jobs primarily as domestic workers or servants in homes, as you can see in the photo above and below. Many of them became maids or even nannies to look after children and were called generally Bridgets as a sort of stereotyped name to describe any kind of Irish woman who worked in a home. They also worked in factories though and could enter the factory floor as a working woman and earn a fairly decent wage. They actually, in fact, made more money than their fathers would have if their fathers still lived in Ireland. Women actually had much more mobility and a faster upward mobility rate economically than Irish men did. They had more opportunities in many ways. So because of that fact, Irish women often sought to marry non-Irish men. So when they came to America, they were less incentivized to marry other Irish immigrant men than they were to find an American man and marry him, because that too would allow them very quickly to move up the socioeconomic scale, depending on the income of their American husband. In the bottom, you can see an Irish maid being caricatured as the Irish Declaration of Independence that we are all familiar with, as the caption reads. This woman who's sort of very hot-tempered and hot-headed, and she is trying to explain to the owner of the home, who's standing on the left, that she needs to get out of the kitchen. So there is this sort of overly stereotyped view of what Irish working women were like. The Irish did, as a community, tend to move toward organized labor. One of the major labor groups that emerges early on are called the Molly Maguires in America. They were an aggressive labor organization who really started out in the mining industry in Pennsylvania, which was a very dangerous job. They did not shy away from using threats of violence to get better working conditions or even better pay. Here on the top image, you can see a sign that was posted by the Molly Maguires in a local tavern in Pennsylvania near the mines where these men were working. It says, "Shanty Hill Thursday, Harry Morgan, your marked man, prepare your coffin at once, or else leave this place. Your life is doomed, and you shall die like a dog if you stay here any longer as my boss. Take warning by order, Molly Maguire." And so this was basically a death warrant or a black spot if they were pirates, to say that bosses who were unkind to their workers had to really keep an eye on their backs. Now, there were other groups like the Knights of Labor, who were a larger labor organization that included Irish immigrants as well as other American laborers, which was much less violent and really composed of all kinds of unskilled laborers, which the Irish tended to flock to because they were the kinds of jobs they were able to acquire. Finally, we have a figure like Mother Jones, who you can see in the photograph at the bottom on the right-hand side of the image, tying the shoelace of a child. And she was the wife of an Irish miner who lived a very difficult life, and she was very concerned about what happened to the families of Irish workers who were killed on the job, often in mines or on other various dangerous jobs. And she created the United Mine Workers of America, which was both a union, labor union, as well as a charitable organization to care for miners' families, the women and the children of men who were either injured on the job or could no longer work. And so she was very, very revered in the Irish community. Now, I mentioned before Irish Catholic schools and the threat that they posed in American society. Here you can see an image of our public schools going to the dogs. And the dogs are actually caricatured to look like the typical, stereotypical Irish person. You might even think that it's a bulldog, which would reference England, but it really is referring to the Irish, particularly because you can see the corncob pipe hanging out the corner of the dog's mouth. There's a video here called God in America, a Catholic Threat, which is a PBS series called God in America that I would really encourage you to look at, which really describes this particular situation in American schools. It's the same documentary that you looked at for the discussion on slavery and Christianity. Now, Catholic parishes did provide private education and training in assimilation for new Irish immigrants. They tended to help ease the transition of these new people into America. But Irish Catholics did also want to attend Ivy League schools, and they were able to attend Ivy League schools at a much faster rate than any other migrant or even immigrant group did in America. So in many ways, they were becoming increasingly more involved in basic and higher education in America. The university quota systems did not keep Irish Catholics out as they were able to do with European Jews, as you'll come to find. But one of the big controversies here is, should we allow Catholics to practice Catholicism in what were predominantly Protestant-led schools, who at this time were still able to pray and discuss the Bible in schools? Or should we make these Catholics start their own parochial schools separate from the public school system in America? Political machines were also a major part of Irish immigrant life, and what they were was a group of people who were able to harness the votes of new immigrants. So people like Boss Tweed, who you can see in the top image under the banner Our Boss, was the big political boss in New York City, and he operated out of Tammany Hall. These people tended to be the center of municipal political power on the city level. What they did was they would give favors in exchange for votes. So when new Irish immigrants came over, they would be given food, and they would be directed toward free English classes if their English wasn't good, or they could change their accents. They were also given opportunities for reduced income housing. They sponsored sports teams and all kinds of things that would engender community cultural growth and meet the most desperate needs of new immigrants. And so when somebody came to you on the docks when you landed and said, do you need somewhere to sleep? Do you need something to eat? I will provide these things for you as long as you vote for my candidate. Of course, people would take them up on their offers. So, yes, these political machines were unethical on one hand, but they were also the strongest and most efficient form of charity on the other hand. And they really picked up the slack of where charitable organizations such as humanitarians and particularly churches were falling short when it came to new immigrants. The controversy becomes how much the Christian church was failing the community, which was obviously part of the reason why these political machines were able to flourish and did so well. Of course, Boss Tweed is here characterized as having a money bag for a head, and he's also characterized as having his thumb over New York and New Jersey, and all of these townships being basically under the thumb and under the control of these political parties who would continue to win elections, basically no matter who they put up for their seat.